Hey everyone,
Hello,
welcome.
hello.
Hey. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started right now. There's a lot of great content to cover today, and we want to use as much of our time together as possible to make sure you hear it all. And I'll say, as you're joining, as you're settling in and getting comfortable, just feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. So I'll kick us off by saying, hello everyone, I'm Laura Kirk. All my friends call me LC, which includes each and every one of you as of right now. I am the new Senior Director of Product Marketing here at ProShop, and I'm going to be your webinar host today. And I'm joining from right downtown Toronto. Okay, first things first. I have to put this slide up before we do anything else. The quick version is ProShop does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to CMMC compliance, but it's one piece of a bigger puzzle that we're going to be talking about today. Compliance overall is an organization-wide effort, and no software tool on its own can hand you a certification. In fact, if anyone makes those claims, I would run in the other direction. The good news, that's actually a big part of what we're here to talk about today. Who owns what in the certification journey, and what you specifically need to do as a machine shop. So keep that question in the back of your mind as we go, and let's get into the good stuff. So like I was saying, hey everyone, welcome. On behalf of everyone at ProShop, we are so glad that you're here with us today. Whether you've been tracking CMMC for a while and you want to get really clear on more of those details, or maybe you just got a flow down requirement from a prime and you're thinking, okay, what exactly do I need to do next? Either way, you are in the right place. ProShop put the session together today specifically for machine shops, not defense contractors in general, not big primes, but the machine shops doing precision work who need real practical answers around CMMC. So we're guaranteeing no fluff or no buzzwords today, just clarity. And we've got about 60 minutes together, so let's make them count. Couple housekeeping items. As always, this session is being recorded. So if your Wi-Fi decides to have a moment, been there, or you want to have to rewatch it later, don't worry. We'll send you the recording link out after the webinar. Expect it within your inbox in the next 24 hours. Questions, kindly ask they go in the Q&A box, not in the chat. The Q&A box is that little panel at the bottom of your screen, so drop your questions in there as they come up, and we'll get as many answered as we can during Q&A. And to do even better, if we can't get to your question during Q&A, we will be personally following up with each of you to make sure you get the information that you need. And like I've already said, chat is open and people are using it. Who am I seeing? We have people from all over. It is such a pleasure to have you here. And let's continue to react to things as we go. Okay, housekeeping done. Now let's hear who we're going to be hearing from today. First up, the one and only Paul Van Meter. Paul is the co-founder and chief industry evangelist here at ProShop. And I want to emphasize something about Paul's background that's really important because it matters. ProShop wasn't built by a software company that decided to go after manufacturing. No, it was built inside a real machine shop that Paul ran with his team for over 17 years by people who know and understand the industry. So, what does that mean? He's lived the problems that this software solves and has had a front row seat into this industry for a while. And joining us from Cherry Beckert, Brian Kirk, a certified C3PAO. He also stole my last name, funny enough. We both have the last name Kirk, we just spell it differently, and we'll be taking that offline after the webinar. And for those of you who don't know what it means, not the last name, the C3PAO, don't worry, we're going to be explaining all of those funny acronyms in this session. But the short version is Brian is literally the person on the other side of these audits. He knows exactly what assessors are looking for because he is one. So when Brian tells you maybe what's going to trip you up or some common best practices if you're just getting started on your journey, I would listen closely. And like I've already said, I'm LC, I'm your host today, and I'll be keeping us on track, and I'll be watching the Q&A box the whole time so your questions don't get missed. Here's our plan for our time together. 5 sections, and at the end, Q&A. So we're going to start with 2026 CMMC compliance reality, then cover what ProShop enforces for you, what auditors are actually checking, who owns what in a certification journey, and close with practical next steps you can run with today before we dive into Q&A. And actually, I'm already seeing some great questions flowing in, so keep them coming. Surprise! Before we jump into the first section, and I'm going to be passing the speaking baton over to Brian, we have a bit of a poll here for you. We'd love to hear from everyone that's joining us today where you are on your CMMC journey. So have you started yet? Are you researching requirements? Are you actively preparing? Are you already certified? You should have a poll that should have just popped up in your window. If you want to give us a second and let us know, that would be awesome. Great responses coming in. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that we have folks across the gamut. And I promise you, no matter where you fall, we have some content that's going to help each and every one of you. Alrighty, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brian. Brian, Kirk Twin, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. And similar to Laura going by LC, my friends call me BK. So I throw out another acronym for you guys for this presentation. But let me start by briefly covering two topics. So the flow down requirement and phase rollout of CMMC. So first, the flow down. When a contract includes a CMC requirement, that requirement flows down to subcontractors that will process, store, or transmit either federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. This requirement is codified in DFARS 252.204/7021, which is the CMC contractual requirement, which requires contracts and applicable subcontractors to have and maintain the required CMC level for the duration of contract performance. So in simple terms, if CUI or FCI, so controlled and classified information or federal contract information, moves through the supply chain, the cybersecurity requirement moves with it. And then secondly, the phase rollout. So the CMC program itself is established in 32 CFR Part 170. So there's two rules, 32 CFR, 48 CFR. 32, to keep things simple, the 32 CFR is the CMC program rule. The 48 CFR is the contractual requirements that allow the DoD to insert CMC requirements into contracts and solicitations. So the CMC program rule, 32 CFR, became effective December 16th, 2024. However, CMC requirements will be inserted into DoD solicitations and contracts gradually through a 4-phase implementation plan over approximately 3 years. So beginning that phase implementation began on November 10th, 2025. Beginning November 10th, 2026, that will mark the beginning of phase 2. And phase 2 is where the DoD can begin to require CMC level 2 third-party assessments by a C3PO in contracts and solicitations. So that's the mark that a lot of contractors are have in the back of their minds as far as planning for CMMC. So this means CMC will not appear in every contract immediately, but over time it will become standard and applicable solicitation. So the key takeaway is CMC is now part of the regulatory framework, and its application in contracts will steadily expand through the phase implementation laid out by the DoD.
Thank you, Brian. And hey, everybody, good to see you all here. This is a big webinar. I think this is the biggest one we've ever had by a good margin. And thank you for all the amazing input into the chat already. That is the most where we're coming in from that I've ever seen. It is, as you can probably tell, this is the most professionalized, fancy webinar we've ever done because LC is now in the house. But it's great to have you here. This is an important topic. To follow on what you were just saying, Brian, we are already seeing some of our customers requiring them to show significant movement towards that CMMC certification. You know, they're asking what their SPRS score is. So just because you have not seen that in your contracts today, or your customers haven't started asking you about it, don't assume that they won't. The law is going to be the rule of the land, and if those clauses are in those contracts, you will be required to get CMMC. So yeah, push back on your customers if they haven't started asking you yet, because if you are working on defense articles and they go into things that fly or blow up or do things like that, that is very likely CUI, and that means that the CMMC requirement will apply to you. So yes, let's move on.
Fantastic. So under DFAR 712, compliance often lives with one person. So usually the IT manager or somebody else overseeing the IT function. So this person would write the system security plan, submit their score to SPRS, and that was largely the end of it. CMC changes this model a little bit. So CMC is not about one technical person managing cybersecurity in isolation. It requires a durable, repeatable, documented process across the organization. So this means involvement from leadership. It means department owners participating. And for precision manufacturers, especially, it means shop floor employees following documented data handling procedures when they're interacting with CUI information or FCI information. So CMC is more about having organizational alignment across the different practices.
Yeah, and speaking to pretty much anyone that works in and runs a machine shop, you know this old hero model, right? You've daily acts of heroism by people that really care a lot about the business. You know, it works sometimes when you start needing to do things like ISO or AS9100. It becomes less viable. You need to have better systems in place. You need to prove and show that you have done the things that are required. And CMMC just takes that to an entirely new level. So you really need to have the systems in place, durable processes that basically guide compliance in these 110 controls that that a shop needs to comply to. So we're taking this idea of the QMS that ProShop has always been so great at and just applying it to cybersecurity principles. So you can be always audit ready, as we talk about with with AS9100, for example. So yeah, build the systems, and we'll get more into which part of that we're going to help support and which parts you need to do yourselves.
Great. So the bottom line, as you can see here on the slide, CMC level 2 is not about having a policy. It's about proving execution, which is why using a FedRAMP cloud service like ProShop ERP can simplify your compliance requirements and the ability to meet CMMC and be certified.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to take this part, talk about, and we are 1 minute ahead of schedule, people. That is fantastic. So I'm going to talk about what we enforce for you. I already mentioned this a little bit, but our background here at ProShop is in regulated industries, right? That's what we did as our own shop at ProCNC. It's what we know. I've literally grown up in this industry, and it's just in our DNA. So we're now applying that DNA to cybersecurity inside of ProShop. And the things that are required to ship jobs on time, run a tight ship, always be audit ready, and even win better work. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. All apply from the QMS side to the cybersecurity side, and this is sort of what we do. So let's get into some more specifics here. And the big announcement that I've been kind of waiting to share. This is a big one, and it does address, Tyler, your question in the chat, in the Q&A. ProShop is well on the way and is on track for FedRAMP moderate equivalency by June of this year. So we have been working behind the scenes very hard for many, many months. And we are doing this not because we had to, right? We have a large percentage of our customers that don't serve the defense industry, but candidly, most of them do. And we want to do this because we know those shops need a solid partner, and it needs to be a mechanism and a tool for them to go meet that cybersecurity requirement. As you all probably know, the defense industrial base has been shrinking over the last decade. It has been just increasingly difficult to exist in that space. And quite honestly, that's not acceptable. That's not okay. Our world, unfortunately, is tumultuous enough that we need a strong defense base. And if we can even play a small part in helping shops like you decide to stay in the DIB or get into the DIB, that is what we need for our national security, and we want to help support that. All right. So let's talk about the documentation, the rules, the problems, right? In a typical shop, and of course, many of you who are on ProShop today are sort of moved past this a little bit. That trust is crucially important in a business, right? If your machinists don't trust the information they're getting from your programming department or your planners, if the inspection department can't be trusted to make sure those first articles are all right, things just don't run well. But trust alone is not enough. Auditors like Brian here will not accept just trust. They need proof that everything was done properly, and it really is black and white. So here's just three of the many sections or aspects of CMMC compliance that we're supporting. Now, I want to be clear. I talked about just a minute ago, we're going for our FedRAMP requirement. That, of course, is a requirement for any shop that is storing CUI, controlled and classified information, in a cloud environment, right? It has to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent or certified. So that component is critical. But then over the last many years, ProShop has built a number of features and functions right within the software to help directly with our clients' 110 controls. So just two of them here: role-based access control, section 311. We have that really nicely handled in our user module and how we manage permissions and logins, session lock and termination as well. We've built a lot of features and functionality, many of which are configurable, so you can set it to exactly how you want to set it. And then, of course, there's the whole digital versus paper question. Being able to lock down the access to CUI, not having it scattered all over the shop floor in drawings and probably mostly drawings, but the idea of doing CMMC in a paper-based shop, I just can't even imagine what that's like. So going fully paperless, making sure everything's locked down and controlled is just so important. So I think that's enough. Let's move on to the next one. Make sure we stay on schedule here. When an airplane goes down, which fortunately doesn't happen that often, right? The NTMSB goes out, they look at the flight data recorder, they figure out exactly what happened, which system failed. They will go then find the exact part possibly that failed, and they will then go through the process of figuring out which vendor, Boeing or Airbus bought that part from or that subassembly from, and all the way down the stream till eventually they might show up in your door and say, hey, prove to me that you made this part exactly to spec, the right material, the right dimensions. What did you inspect it with? How do you know it was calibrated? Who was trained? And so that level of requirement is kind of the same thing when it comes to cybersecurity. So we are providing the logs, we are providing the proof that you are doing things exactly the way that the standard requires. So right, when a ProShop user logs in, they have their user ID, they have all their permissions based on their user profile. We know exactly the timestamp of everything that they've done. We know the values they've changed from and to. So we provide all this relevant evidence to support the requirements. And here's just a few additional ones: 331, 338. And so these are just fundamentally important things that if you try to do it on your own, is just a monumental effort. So we're taking that heavy lift and doing that on your behalf so you can focus on the really important part of making those parts and the things that you can control within your own shop. So that's the ProShop way. I love this analogy. Thank you, LC, for bringing this up, right? When you have when you want to stash all your bearer bonds like Eddie Murphy did back in Trading Places, you don't create your own bank to do that with, right? You get a safety deposit box at your local bank. You get the key to that. You stash all those bearer bonds in there, and you're good to go. You do not need to build the bank. That is not the business you're in. You're in the business of making parts. So let us and AWS, GovCloud, FedRAMP, let us be that bank for you and provide you the tool, the key to access your data when you need it. So what we inherit from AWS is the physical security of all the servers and data centers, right? Many of our clients are already on GovCloud, which means it's all US persons, it's on US soil, there's lots of controls in place, but the FedRAMP level takes it to a next level yet. There is encryption of all data in transit and at rest. Of course, we do all your backups and disaster recovery. And what you need to do is train your people, work on the physical security and the devices, within your facility, making sure you're managing your employees when you hire and fire, and configuring the system to show who has access to what data. But so that's part of the sort of inheritance chain that works on the CMMC level. All right, we are going to do another poll here. So what level of CMMC are you pursuing, if you are pursuing one at all? And option number 4 is not going for level 4 when it exists. Level 4 doesn't exist. CMMC 2.0 only has 3 levels. So yeah, if you just quickly tell us which level you're going for, it's very likely most machine shops are going to be at level 2, although I just talked to someone a couple days ago that says they are already certified to level 3. But yeah, if you're not even sure which one you need to go for, go ahead and choose option, the last option there. All right, we have some great new questions coming on. That is awesome. We'll give this just a minute longer, and then we'll hand this back to Brian to talk about what auditors actually check. What do you say, Brian?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yep, I think we're good.
All right. Yeah, so let's talk about what assessors actually evaluate during a CMC Level 2 certification assessment and how the process works. So the goal here isn't to overwhelm you with 110 controls. It's to show you how the assessment process works and how to prepare for it in a manageable way. So a Level 2 certification assessment follows a standardized process that's laid out in the CMC assessment process, or you'll hear it referred to as the CAP. It's a publicly available document that lays out the process that the C3PO organization is required to follow when they're conducting a certification assessment. So within a certification assessment, there are 4 distinct phases, and I'll summarize them at a high level. Phase 1, pre-assessment. This is where we validate the scope. To do so, we review your system security plan, network diagram or diagrams, asset inventory, data flow diagrams, and confirm that your authorization boundary you've identified aligns with the CMC Level 2 scoping guidance. So there's specific guidance provided that's publicly available on the DOW website around how to scope a CMC Level 2 assessment. You must also have your evidence assembled at this stage in phase 1. So one of the other aspects of phase 1 is that the assessor is confirming you have a sufficient amount of evidence to be able to begin our procedures in phase 2, where we're conducting the assessment. So CMC is not meant to be a surprise inspection. You come prepared to the assessment. You come with your evidence cataloged and in a repository available for the assessor to evaluate. And we are essentially validating what you've implemented. Moving to phase 2, conducting the assessment. This is where we evaluate implementation. So during this phase, we'll review artifacts that you have provided as part of the phase 1 requirement. We'll conduct interviews with the control owners. We may observe system configurations. There may be additional evidence requests if what is provided in phase 1, we need additional artifacts to confirm the implementation of the requirements where necessary. So we are validating what is written in your system security plan is actually implemented and operating. And then moving to phase 3, results and reporting. In this phase, findings are compiled from phase 2. A quality assurance review is performed, and depending on results of the certification assessment, a certificate of status can be issued at this time. So moving to phase 4, certificate issuance and payment closeout, if all requirements at the end of phase 3 are deemed to be met, a final certificate of CMC Level 2 status can be issued and valid for 3 years, pending annual affirmations each year. If allowable POAMs exist, so there's certain requirements you're allowed to have a POAM, certain requirements you're not allowed to have a POAM. If you do have POAMs identified during the certification assessment process and they are allowed, you would then have 180 days to remediate those identified POAMs and have them reassessed. And at that point, if it's determined that those POAMs were remediated and assessed to be scored as met, you will be issued your final certificate of status. That will be good for 3 years.
All right.
So what actually gets assessed? So one of the most critical aspects of CMC is scoping. So if your scope is not properly defined and aligned with the CMC scoping guidance that we mentioned earlier, you will not be able to proceed beyond phase one. And so typically the assessor in phase one, if they identify scoping issues, they'll tell you what those scoping issues were. You would, depending on your assessor, you would have the ability to go back, adjust those scoping issues, and then come back and have the assessor be able to reevaluate during phase one, whether the scope is properly aligned with the CMC level two scoping guidance. So during the pre-assessment, we validate your authorization boundary, meaning what systems are in scope, where does the CUI data reside, or FCI data, what assets are protecting it. Once the scope is confirmed, the assessment then focuses on validating the implementation of the requirements. So that we'll be validating systems that store, process, or transmit CUI information, security tools that protect those systems, people with access to CUI and the processes around managing personnel, physical locations where CUI systems or media reside. So again, the assessment is verifying what should already be implemented. All right, so how do assessors evaluate the 110 requirements or the 320 assessment objectives that are associated with the 110 requirements? Assessors evaluate each requirement using two of the three following methods. So examination, interview, or test. The system security plan serves as the foundation of the assessment. So everything that we evaluate flows from what is documented in the system security plan, which is why it's critical to have a clear written system security plan that details how you've implemented each of the 110 requirements and the associated 320 assessment objectives that you're responsible for. Now, when you're using cloud service providers, the benefit there is that you're inheriting a lot of those requirements, and the assessor is not being required to assess those requirements that you're inheriting from that cloud service provider. They're only assessing those requirements that you have responsibility for or a shared responsibility from that cloud service. So again, the assessor is validating implementation of the requirements and the assessment objectives against how you have described that those requirements and assessment objectives are being implemented per the system security plan. So as our practice has worked through readiness and certification assessments related to CMMC, certain challenges tend to cause, or certain common challenges have been identified. So those common areas being improper scoping, as we kind of mentioned here a couple of times, and scoping is critical for any CMC assessment. Incomplete asset inventories. So for example, asset inventories need to identify your CUI assets, your security protection assets, your contractors managed assets, and specialized assets. So specialized assets, for example, being CMC machines or test equipment. So the CMC guidance requires an organization to apply the level 2 security requirements to the assets where they can and document asset treatment in the system security plan. So that would apply to specialized assets such as CNC machines that manufacturers need to account for within their system security plan and their assessment process. And just maybe a little bit too into the weeds, and we can talk about this if there's a panel question or later on. But specialized assets are a unique category in that they're not expected to meet all 110 requirements due to their special nature. So where that is the case, you would need to document an enduring exception within the system security plan, saying, hey, this, for example, this CNC machine, we're unable to meet this particular requirement because it's required to run on an outdated operating system in order to run that CNC machine. So there are some leeway within CMC rules to allow you to document what's called enduring exceptions, essentially requirements where it's not feasible for you to meet that requirement. Further examples too, and sorry, Laura, got a little ahead of you, but further examples too are a weak or incomplete system security plans, external service providers not being properly addressed, or cloud service providers not meeting the FedRAMP requirements. So preparation in these areas significantly reduces any friction that could occur during a certification assessment.
And Brian, we had a question about what a POAM is, so maybe let's cover that one before we get to the Q&A.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a POAM is a plan of action and milestone. And when you dive into the requirements of CMC or the weeds of 32 CFR, you have a POAM, plan of action and milestone, and you have an operational plan of action. They are two different things. So a plan of action and milestones, to keep things simple, is where you cannot meet a requirement. So if you self-assess yourself or you've gone through a certification assessment and you scored a particular requirement that's not met, that requirement needs to go on a plan of action and milestone with a timeline for remediation and a plan to address that remediation. An operational plan of action is a temporary deficiency or vulnerability. So think of it as you perform a vulnerability scan, you identify a deficiency, that goes on your operational plan of action. There's no timeline required to complete that. It doesn't impact your ability to be certified under CMMC. So two different things, but a plan of action milestone is where you're unable to meet a particular requirement within the 110 from 800-171. Great question. So assessment readiness tips or tips to be ready. So to prepare for a certification, first, understand your business operations, where CUI data exists within your environment, and what type of CUI data, what type of information or CUI information you have. As a huge challenge right now within the ecosystem, given there's been a lack of clarity around identifying and labeling CUI information from the DoD, which they are currently working through. But that's a critical aspect is being able to identify where the CUI information exists so that you can properly scope your authorization boundary that would go through an assessment. Next will be developing your system security plan. So as you mentioned previously, that was the foundation for your certification assessment. And that system security, so verifying or making sure your system security plan addresses all 110 requirements and 320 assessment objectives that you have responsibility for. And next, also maintain a complete asset inventory aligned with the CMC scoping categories, as we mentioned previously. And then additionally, compile assessment artifacts required to evidence the implementation of the requirements and assessment objectives that you have responsibility for. This is another area we see contractors get held up in a certification assessment. They start their assessment, we go through phase 1, but they haven't collected and compiled all the assessment artifacts needed to validate the implementation of the requirements. And then finally, conduct a mock assessment. So know where your gaps are. And additionally, a mock assessment helps you compile that repository evidence that you would need for a certification assessment that you can hand over to the assessor. So I'll just end on this note for the slide. Preparation is key to a smooth certification assessment process. And then, so, we've talked about mock assessment, gap assessment, readiness assessment. What are the benefits of a gap assessment? It's highly recommended that organizations preparing for a certification assessment conduct a gap assessment or a readiness assessment prior to their certification. The purpose is simple, to identify and resolve issues that could put your certification at risk before the formal certification assessment begins. You guys are incurring a huge cost in going through the certification assessment process. You want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you go into that certification, so you can make sure you'll have a successful certification to reduce any assessment risks that may creep up. So a gap assessment can help you address common problem areas that we've kind of alluded to here previously, such as improper scoping, incomplete asset inventories, weak system security plans, missing or unorganized evidence, and third parties providers such as external service providers or cloud service providers not meeting the applicable requirements. So a well-executed readiness assessment reduces surprises and increases the likelihood that you'll have a smooth certification process.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Brian. We are still 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which means we'll have more time for Q&A, which is good because we have a whole bunch of questions. Really good ones too. So let's talk about the 4 layers and 4 owners of getting certified. So compliance is not just a one-party thing. It is a shared stack between us, between our provider, AWS, between you, and then the RPO and C3PO. So there's the application layer, of course. That's what we're providing, right? We're providing all the features and functions, which I've alluded to a few of them. The software, the logs, the access control. It's a bunch of the 110 controls. Then there's that infrastructure layer, right? And we use AWS. So it'd be GovCloud and then the FedRAMP environment specifically. They manage the servers, the data center security. So you guys inherit that. There was a question if we will provide a shared responsibility matrix. Yes, we absolutely can and will. We are actually sort of refining our latest version of it based on our FedRAMP goal for June. So that will definitely be available. Then there's the organization layer. That's you and your company, right? You need to manage your facility. You need to manage the people. You need to write the policies and the procedures, many of which Brian were just alluding to. And there's this assessment layer, right? An RPO, registered practitioner organization, and then the C3PO, the assessor themselves. So they can help you with their gap analysis, do those audits, and ultimately get that certification. And let's talk a little bit more about the application layer. Of course, that's what we provide. And so what we own, like we own that secure application architecture. We provide, audit relevant logs and access control workflows, architectural diagrams for the SSP, right? How exactly is ProShop architected? Where does that CUI go? We'll provide some system hardening guidance that's in alignment with the NIST requirements. Part of having a paperless shop floor means you're a lot more computer heavy. And so we are working hard on developing guidance to help recommend to our customers something that they can put in place in conjunction with the controls that we have to provide an environment that is secure and locked down, and hopefully less expensive than a traditional setup. Of course, Safe Plus, right? Secure Access File Ecosystem. That's what SAFE stands for. Kelsey came up with that acronym, by the way, a couple of years ago. That is an important part of file management. The CUI is mostly in the files, and of course we display those files within the browser environment, and ProShop Safe manages all of that. I did see a question as well about JSON files as it relates to setting permissions. Yes, ProShop is absolutely going to be building a user interface right within ProShop where you configure all those user permissions. So that'll be entirely in the environment. So what we don't own that SSP. We don't own that POAM. That is your responsibility. If you have a reporting incident, it is up to you to report that to the DoD. And of course, it's up to you to set up the security of your local networks and your workstations. But like I said, it is a shared stack, but ultimately the manufacturer is the one responsible, right? When an assessor comes and they're going through their 110 controls, if you can't say yes or show compliance to one of them, that is not the responsibility of the partner that you're using, your MSSP or your cloud provider. It is ultimately up to the shop to make sure they're passing all those controls. All right, the questions are still stacking up. So AWS GovCloud, the physical security, of course, as I said, of that. Now, ProShop may not be the only cloud service provider you have. You may have others. And if you have any others, you need to make sure that those cloud service providers are going to be FedRAMP or are already FedRAMP. They are the ones that will own that physical environment of the servers, and that is just a non-negotiable. So if you are storing CUI in a cloud, those partners must be FedRAMP or equivalent, which is basically the same thing as far as the auditors are concerned. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. You own the shop floor, right? We just talked about this. Even when you're using a FedRAMP aligned partner, like we will be soon, and you inherit all those data center controls, through us from them. You don't need to provide, biometric access to your shop floor and where those servers are, but you do again need to manage this physical security of your facility. Many companies are going to key card kind of door systems that have logs, of course. Your local IT, whether you do it in-house or you're working with an MSP or an MSSP, that sort of pairing of you and your partner there will help secure all the firewalls and the endpoint protection of laptops and devices. Of course, personnel checks, background checks, and training are required. You have to have those records. And of course, all that can be stored right inside of ProShop in our training module and our user module. And of course, you ultimately are responsible for maintaining your system security plan, and the auditors will be checking for that proof. All right. And then Brian, you're taking this one.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So kind of keeping in line with the theme of CMMC, which is this, a lot of it is understanding acronyms that are being thrown out. So one of the key acronyms here is RPO versus C3PO. So a C3PO is an authorized or accredited by the Cyber AB to conduct official CMC Level 2 certification assessments. So these organizations are required to meet strict requirements, including they have to go through their own DIPCAC assessment, which is similar to or follows the same vein as the CMC Level 2 certification assessment. They have to have their own environment that complies with CMC Level 2 to be able to conduct these assessments. They will have to go through ISO 17020 compliance as a conformity body. And then they have a minimum requirement for CCA staffing. Additionally, an RPO is a registered provider organization. So they provide advisory and readiness support to help organizations prepare for certification. It's a designation that's provided by the Cyber AB. Some firms like Cherry Bekaert are both an RPO and a C3PO. However, it's important to note that due to strict independence requirements from the Cyber AB, the same organization cannot provide consulting and turn around and perform the certification assessment on the same client.
That's a good distinction to understand. All right. So we just want to reinforce this point here. This is a shared stack. That is not a solo mission. I know a lot of shop owners out there that I've talked with are, they're resourceful, they are gritty, they have built machine shops, the hardest company to run in the world. And a lot of them sort of have this like solo, fortress. I got to do it all myself. I got to be responsible for everything. But this is not that. You do not have to manage all 110 controls alone. We lock down that application layer. Our hosting provider locks down the physical servers. That leaves you free to focus on exactly the things that you control, your people, your floor, and your policies. And I do want to mention that in our new FedRAMP aligned boundary architecture and the security controls are designed to support a substantial portion of the level 2 requirements, helping reduce that compliance burden. We can't yet today say exactly how many of the 110 controls, because we're still working on a few features and getting everything kind of completely dialed down, but it is going to be a lot of them. So there'll be fewer of them that you need to manage entirely on your own. And we believe that's really important for supporting our clients that want to pursue these opportunities, want to stay compliant, want to help protect our country's national security and sensitive data, but not do it entirely on their shoulders. So, all right, let's move to what's next. So some stuff, we'll talk about a few things you can do today. We'll move to the next slide. We're going to share in the chat a couple of links. One is a DoD assessment guide. This is published directly from the government themselves, from the DoD. It can be a very useful tool. So open that, check, look at that thing, get familiarized with it. Ultimately, you can start doing an early gap analysis even on your own, right? Once you sort of start understanding those controls. And then once you are close to, so the second link we'll add in here is the SPRS link. So this is the system that the government is using to, when the primes can see into it as well, to let a company share what they believe is their score towards 110 controls. Some of your customers may already be requiring you to fill that out. Some of your customers may not be, but ultimately this is an important part of the puzzle. So really start to understand this stuff. Once you are ready to reach out to an RPO or get some outside help, of course, start to do that. And then ultimately, once you feel like you're getting ready for the light at the end of the tunnel of when you can pass an audit, you'd of course need to reach out to a C3PAO like Cherry Bekaert. Brian, maybe you can mention sort of what your lead times are. I know the lead times are stacking up pretty long and the queues are long. So this is partly the urgent nature of shops really starting to do this sooner, so they don't get in the end of a 9-month waiting list. So I'm just curious, what is your waiting list right now?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Paul. There's huge demand right now for CMC, given the number of contractors within the defense industrial base that are handling CUI data. So there's a supply demand mismatch right now between the number of C3POs within the ecosystem and the number of contractors that need to be certified for level 2. So our lead time right now, we're scheduling certifications out Q2 to Q3 of 2026. We have about a 4 to 6 month lead time for certification assessments.
Okay. And Laura, Elsie and I just were at CUICon, CUICon just a couple of weeks ago and heard similar things. The auditors and even the RPOs have a lot of them have really long backlogs. So it is something that it's good to move earlier because the backlogs are just going to increase. All right. Who was Laura? All right. Yeah, so I want to take a moment here just to kind of talk about something, right? This is hard, right? Those of you that have been working in this industry for a long time, you've been working hard on making good parts, getting them on time, and hopefully making a margin on it. And all of a sudden, these requirements have come down. Although not all of a sudden, they've actually been in place since 2017. But but the theme that working in the manufacturing precision machining business just keeps getting harder and harder is absolutely true. I totally get it. We've covered a lot of stuff today, and before we get into the Q&A, I think it's worth acknowledging that this does seem overwhelming to a lot of shops. I've talked to many owners, many leaders that say they're either still putting their head in the sand or they're like, oh my gosh, I realize I got to do this because I have to keep, a large percentage of my business is in the defense space and I have to do it. And most small shops don't have a compliance department. They don't have a cybersecurity team. They probably don't even have an IT manager necessarily. So we're not going to pretend that this is easy, but this is something that I think offers a massive opportunity to those that really move ahead assertively. A lot of companies out there are not going to be pursuing this hard. We've already talked about the DIB already shrinking over the past few years, and there are many shops out there that are maybe closer to the owners retiring and closing the business down or trying to sell it off. They just don't want to tackle this, or maybe defense work is only 5 or 10% of their business, and they realize that the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and they just decide to get out of it. That is all, even without those companies deciding to get out, there's already way more machining out there than the industry can handle. So it's a massive opportunity. And I do also want to mention that at the conference we were at a couple of weeks ago, I believe there's already been some significant talk that other branches of the U.S. government, not related to the Defense Department, will also be adopting these requirements. And I think it's only a matter of time before the primes and even commercial aerospace or commercial space flight, like SpaceX and companies like that, will very likely adopt more cybersecurity controls. No company wants their data to be hacked because their vendors' networks are weak. So this is a big opportunity. Again, it's going to get busier and busier with all the activity, and as the phase rollout, the phases come into play. So I really recommend getting your head out of the sand if it has been in there. Do this work. Let us be your partner with it. You have worked so hard to build your shop. Let us now help you protect it. All right, and let's get into a few more specifics. I know these are really interesting and matter to people. And like I said, we can't yet say exactly how many of the 110 controls we can help directly check off or support you in helping check off, but here's just a few, right? There are requirements for the passwords that you have into your systems. ProShop has designed and built a very sophisticated password management system. So you can define the complexity requirements of your password. You can even choose the CMMC option. It's right on the menu, right? We built that a few years ago. All logging into systems that hold CUI have to be FIPS compliant. We've been supporting YubiKeys for the last few years now. That is like the gold standard in FIPS compliant. It can't be phished like other systems, and a lot of the sort of second factor authentication systems out there, well, although they're good, they may not be FIPS compliant. So you have to make sure that you have a system that is, and ProShop does support that. Of course, we've talked about ProShop Safe a little bit already in the webinar. That goes along with what we call our classifications module. That allows our customers to tag items as they are uploaded into ProShop. Could be FCI, could be CUI. That adds a meta tag to those files. And then, of course, it keeps an entire log of every access to every one of those files, who did it, when they did it. And of course, you can also set the permissions of which folders and files and types of classifications different users have access to see. If you have people that work in your business that do not need to see CUI in any way, you can lock them out from seeing that. They can still use ProShop, they just won't be able to see records that are tagged with CUI. And on that point, today ProShop Safe is for files and attachments. Fairly soon, ProShop Safe will also include all the records within ProShop. So the actual, records, the part records, the work order records, those can also be tagged and classified. Of course, CUI management is critically important. That CUI has to be encrypted in transit and at rest. We do support that for sure. But one of the more critical things is the way that we've architected ProShop Safe and the way it maps that secure drive when you log into ProShop allows you to transact on those files in the cloud environment without having to download them onto your local network. And this is critically important and uniquely different from any other ERP company I've ever heard of. So if you need to program something, you don't need to download a copy onto any workstation that has your CAM system. If you are marking up a drawing, that can be done in the cloud. So if you are, editing a bill of materials that your customer sent you in an Excel file, that can be maintained exclusively in the cloud without having to have multiple copies on your local network that just change the scope of where all that CUI is stored. And then, of course, there's a user-defined groups and very high resolution of the access rules. We can even allow someone to have a nested access to a folder, maybe the G-code folder where a machinist has read access only, but a programmer has write access, and it's underneath a series of other folders that they do not have access to. This is all possible in ProShop, which is quite a powerful tool. And then, of course, there's dozens and dozens more. Again, for those clients, when we do have our finished shared responsibility matrix, that will be available for you to really dig into deep. All right, last thing before we get to Q&A, just a couple questions you should be asking. For your current ERP or future ERP considerations or any cloud service provider, you need to be asking, is your data stored or will it be stored in a FedRAMP moderate or equivalent cloud environment? If they say, oh yeah, we're GovCloud, we're good, do not take that answer. You need to drill them all the way to answering that FedRAMP question. GovCloud is not enough. Similarly, you need to ask them about that FIPS validated encryption, right? If they can't provide that, that system will not pass. You need to ask about data sovereignty. Just because they're hosting potentially in GovCloud doesn't mean their entire team is US persons, right? ProShop does have US and Canadian employees, and in our FedRAMP environment, we will be locking that down entirely, so only our US persons will be interacting with those customers. And then, of course, ask them about a shared responsibility matrix, right? If they can't provide that, that very likely is an indication that they are not ready to support you on your CMMC journey. And again, you do not want to be in a spot where you've taken what they've said at face value and say, yeah, we should be good with that. You need to drill it all the way to home because that compliance is your responsibility. All right, let's get into the Q&A. There is so much of it. Elsie, I think I'm just going to rifle through these and without you having to queue them up because there's just so many of them.
It's incredible. The only one I will say, though, Paul, that I was going to be playful with you about was the question about is G-code CUI? Because I think we heard that question numerous times at QECon a couple weeks ago.
We did. And I've heard opinions on both sides of this. I think it's safe to assume that it will be considered CUI or a derivative of CUI, which means it needs to be handled like CUI. What that exactly means about how you're going to get it from the cloud to the CNC machine. I know I've been in shops that are using USB drives that have keypads, so they're kind of encrypted on those drives. I know one of our customers that already got CMMC certified was using thumb drives, although interestingly enough, G-code didn't even come up in the conversation with their assessor. But I think it is safe to assume that you should assume that CUI will ultimately be considered G-code. I mean,
And
will be
and to
CUI.
put
Yeah,
and to put
Brian,
on
you have an
that too,
opinion?
Paul, there's a couple questions too around what is CUI or is this considered CUI? My my least favorite, but some frustratingly often used responses, it depends. You're going to hear this a lot going through CMC and getting prepared for CMC. But it ultimately depends on what is written in the contract and what is defined as CUI information. Now, this is one of the pain points is, okay, there's a lack of clarity around defining what is CUI information per the contract. And completely understand a lot of contractors are going through that very same issue. And so if that is the case, one recommend speaking with your legal counsel and going through those applicable contracts, identifying, okay, have they classified information as considered CUI? Do they define the attributes around this information that is considered to be CUI information to allow us to identify and classify information we have within our environment as CUI? If that isn't defined, then recommended to reach out to your contracting officer, the prime officer or the DoD contracting officer to get clarity around what is considered CUI data per this contract. They should be providing you with a security classification guide that details the attributes of the information that is considered to be CUI information.
Okay, very good. So there's no way we're going to get through all of these in the next 4 minutes, and unfortunately, I do have a very hard stop. But we'll just go through as many here as we can. Um, to let's see here to John Betancourt, 26 employee percentage shop that does COI and non-COI. I heard at the conference a couple of weeks ago that if you're doing more than maybe 30% COI, you should just treat the entire thing like it's COI. If it's a tiny, tiny portion, you could scope that off and just have a few people use it. But if it's any more than that, it just do the whole thing. It's just going to be easier. For Philip Richard, yes, ProShop logs do cover file transfers as well as the actual stuff inside the ProShop database itself. So you should be good there. I'm going to skip the anonymous one. We can get to that. Yep, GUI, G code is probably CUI.
And like we
Daniel,
said, and
what's
like we
that?
said at the start of the webinar, everyone, if we can't get to your question, we do have a lot, which is incredible. We will get back to every single one of you if we don't have the chance to get to you in the next 3 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Can you give an example of an improperly scoped plan and how it looked properly scoped? Maybe that's something for us to work on and get back to you on that, Andrew, or share that with others as well. Yeah, Dwayne, shared responsibility applies for a POAM. Is that something you want to take?
Yeah. Well, okay, share responsibility and poems. So you could have a poem identified if you weren't if there was a shared responsibility from a cloud service provider that you were required to implement, and you in order to achieve a particular requirement and you haven't implemented that shared responsibility, then that's where it could lead to a plan of action and milestones because that requirement has been implemented and it would be scored as not met during an assessment.
Okay, very good. Yes, our FedRAMP boundary will be more expensive than the base. It's exceedingly expensive for us to get this, and we do need to pass it on. And not all of our clients need it, so it'll only be for those that do need it. You can talk to your CSMs, your client success manager, if you do want to talk about that. You do not need to be AS9100 first. You can get CMMC without being AS9100. Asking about Teams, sharing setup photos and setup information back. Oh, about Teams, like Teams chat, Dwayne, I'm wondering. Yeah, if you're sharing CUI across chat, you probably need to be on the GCC High suite. So you might want to consider whether that investment is worth it or using a different tool for sharing chat amongst your team. And
And you know
Jason,
what?
what's that?
With your hard stop in 1 minute, I
All
want to
right,
get
all
you there
right,
on time.
all
But
right.
no,
Let's move along to the last slide or two.
yeah, I
Thank you for
actually think we
keeping
need
us.
to do a webinar where we just round robin you to answer as many questions as possible. That was
And
incredible.
get some of our other team on here as well.
Yes. One more thing before we say goodbye. Like I said, we will be following up with anyone whose questions we couldn't answer. Thank you so much for submitting them. We do have a field event coming up March 19th. If you're interested, please scan the QR code. All of the information about our upcoming events are on the ProShop ERP website. So certainly encourage you check that out, especially if you are in the area. And then as well, that's a wrap. So we've generally enjoyed spending the last hour with each of you. I know we're competing for your time, and I hope we gave you something that's really useful and valuable for you to take back to your shop today. A huge thank you for Brian, aka my Kirk twin, I'll get that better, for joining us from Cherry Beckert. Paul, thank you as always for making something that can feel really complicated feel something that's doable, achievable, and exciting. Like I said, team, this recording will hit your inbox very soon. If you have any follow-up questions, don't be a stranger. Feel free to contact each of us, and we'll do the best we can to get back to you ASAP. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you, Elsie. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.